Hello and welcome everyone. We're so pleased that you could join us for this special webinar series exploring different aspects of the menopause journey. These sessions have been made possible thanks to the incredible cooperation of library services across the Northwest. And when libraries come together, amazing things can happen. And I think this series has been a prime example of that. We'd love to encourage you to make the most of your local library, whether it's for health information, community support, or just simply a quiet place to reflect. Your library is there for you. A huge thank you to Libraries Connected, whose generous funding has made these sessions possible. Their support has allowed us to bring expert voices and valuable insights directly to you. Just to let you know, today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available at a later date, along with the option to submit questions, which we'll hope to answer when the recording is published. This is the final session in what has been an extraordinarily informative series of webinars. I've certainly learned a lot anyway. The session today is being recorded and, as I say, will be made available alongside earlier sessions such as the Perimenopause and Menopause journey and the bone health webinars. Today, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Catherine Munro and Renee McGregor, who are going to talk to us today about weight management, which I can attest to at least is really tricky, especially as we enter midlife. Renee and Cath will talk about how our bodies work and how what we eat influences our health. They will also cover evidence-based approaches to eating and exercising for a healthy body. So without further ado, welcome Renee and Cath, and thank you for agreeing to speak to us today.
Hi there. Hi, John. Thanks for having me back. Obviously, I spoke a few weeks ago on menopause, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a recap on that before handing over to Renee, who I'm sure will introduce herself as we get to her slides. But just to say that I moved up to Kendal in 2022, and Renee followed a couple of years later. We met and have really gelled over health, women's health, hormones, and nutrition, and lots of other bits, and we've done quite a few talks together, so this is another of those. So we're going to talk about menopause and the role of lifestyle. Renee's expertise in this will be absolutely gold dust for anybody that's listening, and she'll talk about healthy bodies and I guess the role of weight specifically. I won't say any more on that because she will definitely go there. So just to recap, this slide was in my previous presentation, so sorry for those that have seen it before, but I think it's just important to recap a couple of points. So and definitions really. So menopause specifically is just one day in our lives, which is the day which is 1 year after our last period. So in effect, it's a retrospective diagnosis or a retrospective thing. Menopause is a word that means monthly and stop. So meno, monthly, pause and stop. And as I say, it's just that one day. There's a build up to menopause, which is perimenopause, which can last 5 to 7 years. And any day after our menopause is postmenopause. Average age of menopause is 51, and early menopause is age 40 to 55, with premature ovarian insufficiency or very early menopause occurring under the age of 40. And I think it's just worth noting the figures, the statistics around POI, so premature ovarian insufficiency, that it will occur for 1 in 100 women under 40, which is way more than I think most people realise, and 1 in 1,000 women under 30. Again, probably way more than people realise. And the pictures really tell the story of different people's journeys, or that's what they're there for, really. So, you know, some people breeze through menopause and perimenopause. About 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 women will not get much in the way of symptoms. And sometimes that's to do with the lifestyle that they've adopted. Sometimes it's genetic, and sometimes it's just that they don't get many symptoms. For others of us, the path is more windy. It's a bit up and down, and I'll come to in a couple of slides time a bit of an explanation of why. It can be bumpy with unexpected turns in the road, and so I guess the more prepared we can be, the better, which is why I think this series has been so good in hopefully giving people the tools to know how to prepare for the certain journey that we will all go on at some point. The final picture is falling off a cliff, which is what people often describe after they've had a hysterectomy and their ovaries removed, or if they are on specific treatments, perhaps for breast cancer or other treatments that will stop your hormones circulating, that will cause menopause the day after whatever it is that's triggered the block of hormones or the loss of estrogen. I think the final thing on this slide is just to say, I mean, I hear a lot from women that they've been told they're too young to be menopausal. I guess if the average age of menopause is 51, just going back up the slide, and perimenopause lasts for 5 to 7 years, then it isn't unusual for women in their mid or early 40s to be expecting to experience perimenopause. And bearing in mind that's an average age of menopause at 51, if we kind of track to the lower end of that range, there will be women having a very normal menopause at 45. But again, if it's perimenopause lasts 5 to 7 years, you can expect that there will be women in their later 30s experiencing perimenopause. I won't go on about it other than to say, obviously, early menopause is still not that unusual. And again, 5 to 7 years, early to mid 30s, people might be experiencing perimenopause symptoms. So it's just really to highlight, if you do go to the doctors or to a clinician and you're talking about your symptoms and you're told you're too young, it's something to challenge. And I would use this slide or some of the data on it to help you with that conversation. Just to have a brief look at a graph which I showed in my last talk, which is I showed it to the GPs in my practice yesterday, and everyone pretty much admitted that they don't really understand it that well, which is interesting. But anyway, there's 2 phases to a monthly cycle, and this is very much in our reproductive years, and if we're having a regular period, so a follicular phase and a luteal phase. And what's happening is in the first half of your cycle, our ovaries produce several up to 10 to 15 eggs. One of those will become dominant, and then at mid-cycle, we'll produce that egg as an ovulation. Subsequent to that, what that leaves behind is something called a corpus luteum, which produces progesterone, which is why we see that blue line go up in the second half of our cycle. And you'll see at the bottom of that graph that the endometrial cycle shows that at the beginning, you've got that breaking up and shedding, which is a period. And then it doesn't really do vast amounts in the first half of the cycle, but under the influence of progesterone and estrogen in the second half of the cycle, it really thickens up. And it's when that progesterone drops that we get the prompting of a period. And it's just good to kind of understand that that's what's happening. So we have progesterone only in half of our cycle. And Renee may touch on hormones in her part of the presentation as well. And then just to highlight that hormone changes, hormones change over time. So if you imagine each of those bumps in the premenopause part of this chart is the equivalent of what I've just shown you on the previous chart. So a monthly swing in progesterone, 2 peaks of estrogen, one bigger than the other, although they show them the wrong way around on here. And then moving into perimenopause, everything becomes quite chaotic. And for those people that have experienced perimenopause symptoms, it actually feels chaotic. I think the other thing to note about this is everything's gradual. And so there's a day when we start our periods, but if you remember back to your teenage years, or if you've had teenage children, it's not that they suddenly start their period or they suddenly grow hair where they didn't have it before. There's a build up to that of grumpiness and sleep changes and all sorts of things which kind of give us that start to our hormonal kind of reproductive life. We then have that premenopause where things are regular, but actually the changes into perimenopause are very, very gradual. And that might just be some subtle changes in your periods. So periods becoming less or more frequent, heavier or lighter, or it might be that you start to get some symptoms, but it's not that one day you'll suddenly develop symptoms. It's very subtle, which is why it's worth tracking periods and why it's worth tracking symptoms as well, which we won't touch on today. But if you look at the previous recording that I did at the beginning of October, you'll be able to see those. And just to say then that in postmenopause, that chaos of hormones settles down and calms. Just building on that then, this is a chart that was shown at the British Menopause Society conference this year. And what it's kind of doing, in some respects at least, is giving us a bit of hope that things improve over time. So those brain fog symptoms of perimenopause and early menopause do improve over time, although it may never fully kind of return to where you were in your 20s and 30s. That vasomotor symptoms, so hot flushes and night sweats, have a peak around menopause, but again improve. You'll note that the orange curve plateaus. Some people do experience night sweats and hot flushes into their 60s and 70s, but a lot of people's symptoms will settle. And then those cognitive, the mood symptoms tend to improve over time as well. The one thing that tends to get worse as we lack estrogen, on this chart you'll see, is sexual and urogenital alterations. So I guess the news from this is, rather than is that things do get better over time, and that equates into weight and all sorts of bits as well. We do need to adapt how we eat and how we exercise, which Renee will talk about, but actually a lot of things will improve over time. So just to highlight that there is hope. Just kind of a couple of bits that to add in there. So there's a lot of confusion around what's the right diet. And I think in midlife, what I hear from patients is, I'm doing what I've always done, but I can't lose weight, or I'm thicker around the middle now. I don't like how I look. I'm not comfortable in my clothes. I've really cut calories. I'm exercising more than ever, but my weight's not coming off and I feel terrible. I don't know what the right food is for me. I hear so much on social media and I'm confused, and I'm sure Renee will touch on that. I think I'm craving the wrong foods and I've got no energy to exercise, are other things that I hear. And again, I guess just in terms of some of the exercise confusion again, or some of the things I hear, well, I'm on my feet all day or at work, so do I need to do any extra exercise? I walk the dog every day, is that enough? And also, what exercise should I prioritize? So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Renee, and she'll be able to cover a lot of the nutrition side of things, and hopefully we'll touch a little bit on the exercise side of things as well. So Renee, I'm going to pass over to you, and just tell me when you need to move the slides on.
Thanks so much, Cath. And thank you to everybody who is here. My name is Renee McGregor. I am a sports, exercise and medicine dietitian. And as Cath said, we've done quite a lot of work together in the 2 years that I've been up in Kendal. So as Cath says, this is quite a confusing and complicated time for us women. And one of the things I will say is that we do need to be kind to ourselves, and we do need to allow ourselves a little bit of grace. I also think the more information you have, the more empowered you can be. So the more you understand your body, the more self-aware you are, and the more you can kind of respond to it appropriately. So if we just talk initially about the role of nutrition, people often kind of just think, well, nutrition is just energy. And to a certain degree, yeah, that's what it is. It provides us with energy. But what a lot of people don't realize is that actually there's an optimal amount of energy we need daily to ensure that we work properly, so that our bodies and our minds function. And I think often in the conversations around dietary restriction and body aesthetic goals, we often forget about how sometimes these restrictive practices can have a real negative impact on our mental health, and particularly on our psychology. So I'm going to talk quite a lot about that. That's a kind of big specialist area of mine. So we're going to talk kind of quite a bit about this as we go through these slides. The other really important point of nutrition is that it does prevent nutrient deficiencies. And again, these nutrients, we talk about vitamin D, and we talk about vitamin E, we talk about our, we talk about our B vitamins and all these sort of nutrients that we talk about: zinc, magnesium, calcium, iron. And I think sometimes people just look at me when I talk about them going, well, why do I need them? Well, actually, they're really important. They help us to function properly. They often are what we call coenzymes, so they actually help biological processes in the body. So if we don't have them, we don't feel good. And something that Cath and I have noticed through our work in this area, particularly in like perimenopausal women, and we don't really know the mechanism behind it, it's just like observational for us because we've worked with so many women, is that we are starting to see that a lot of perimenopausal women do seem to become a bit more deficient, particularly in iron and B12. I think the B12 is probably related to the changes that happen in our microbiome, so in our gut, and kind of the hormonal influences on our gut. our gut environment. And iron, again, I guess just all the changing hormones are probably having an effect. So even if you've never been deficient in these nutrients before, what I will say is if you are feeling very fatigued, while that can be a perimenopausal symptom, I would really recommend speaking to your GP about just having a routine blood test to check iron, B12, and vitamin D, just to make sure that these are not low, because they will also contribute to fatigue and make you tired. And the other thing to say is that often if we are on very restrictive diets, if we have decided to take things into our own hands and cut back, this can also affect our absorption of these nutrients and making sure that we need enough energy to absorb these nutrients. So a lot of people take vitamins and minerals as a bit of an insurance policy. There's no real point in taking vitamins and minerals if you're not getting enough energy in your body to do the work that it needs to do. And that kind of brings me on nicely to kind of, the last 2 points on this slide, which is, again, we need nutrition for our immunity. So actually, there are some really good practices we can do. Hydration is an important one. So obviously this time of year when it gets a bit colder, we can all get a bit slack with drinking enough water or, equivalent. So if you like flavored water, that's fine. If you like squash, that's fine. If you like herbal teas, that's also fine. But it's really important because saliva is our first line of defense. And if we don't hydrate, we don't produce saliva. So that's a really important part of our immune health. But equally, certain nutrients are really key. So again, going back to the vitamin D, the iron, and also carbohydrate. So these are very, very important nutrients that we need to maintain a nice, healthy immune system. And finally, as I said right at the beginning, we need energy to be optimal. And a big part of being optimal is actually our hormonal health. Now, while obviously in perimenopause, we have fluctuating reproductive hormones, please do remember that we have hormones in every part of the body they're used by every biological process in the body. So we still need to keep an eye on how we look after those parts of our health as well. Next slide, please, Cath. So just to kind of explain that a little bit, as you can see, I think often when we talk about hormones, we do just hear estrogen, testosterone, maybe cortisol, maybe thyroid hormones, but we don't necessarily hear about all the other hormones. And like I said, they are used in every single biological process in our body. So actually, they help with everything. So if you are somebody who's active, they're really important for your performance. So that would be growth hormone is really important for your performance. Things like injury risk, we know that actually as estrogen and testosterone start to decline, so obviously in men, testosterone can also start to decline during the later years. It's not as, it's always going to happen in women. It doesn't always happen in men. It's like 25% of the population where you can get a reduction in testosterone. But for women, obviously, all of us will go through the perimenopause and menopause at some point. But we do know as these hormones reduce, then that does have a negative effect on our bone health, which can increase our risk of injury, particularly if we are active already. So that's something to be mindful of. Also, things like our connective tissue becomes a little bit more worn out as we get older. So we just need to look after it. We need to make sure we're doing the right types of exercise to help maintain good connective tissue. Things like mood and cognition. Obviously, Cath has mentioned the brain fog symptom. Again, these do get affected. Some of this is estrogen related. Some of this is also the fact that going back to our gut biome, and actually we can affect the gut biome, which means we also affect our production of things like serotonin, so which is also our happy hormone. So there's lots of other hormones involved, and I think it's just being mindful. It's very easy to focus on estrogen alone. Two hormones I want to bring into play here, you can see on the slide, are cortisol and prolactin. These are our stress hormones, and sometimes what can happen is, perimenopause is a stressful time on the body generally. Like if any of you have any of these, I'm not saying you need to go and get one because I'm not a big fan of them, but some people do have devices that they use to monitor their health, and they have readiness to train and how you slept, and they collect all this data. But actually what you might notice is that your numbers may have changed as you've gone through the perimenopause, and that is because it's a very stressful process on the body. And thinking about stress on the body is we have to then be careful about how much more stress we layer on the body. So again, going back to very restrictive practices, avoiding certain food groups, etc., this can then cause cortisol in particular to spike and to remain high. And if cortisol sort of stays high, then this actually starts to have a negative impact on our body composition, particularly around our middle, so around our trunk, and it also starts to affect our metabolism of both carbohydrate and fat. So we're trying to keep a balance, which is really, really hard when you've got all these other things going on as well. But it's just to kind of help you to understand that with all the noise that goes on in this world, it can be hard to know what we should be doing. And that's what I'm here for today. Next slide, please. So, I mean, I'm going to run through the next few slides very quickly. I mean, why are so many of us getting it so wrong? Well, if we move on to the next slide, I think we know that, Cath's already mentioned social media, but I think it's more than social media. I think it's a kind of it's a societal narrative, it's a societal construct in that we very much have bought into this move more, eat less conversation. And what I ask you to do for a second is just think about, where did this come from? And actually, it came from the diet industry. And let's face it, the diet industry want you to fail. And they want you to fail because they want you to come back and spend money on them again and again and again. They are profiting from you. So this narrative has become really popular. But actually, what we know is in a lot of the recent metabolic studies, I think this kind of calories in, calories out has now been started to get completely disproven. And it's more about the nutrient quality of your diet and actually your lifestyle in general that can really help. We also know that we're not all the same. And that's really important to remember. So there is no one size fits all. And one of the things I've been trying to do since moving to Kendal is slowly get round the GP practices and help them, to educate them, to also move away from fixating on a number on the scale or a BMI, because actually you can be in a bigger body, you can even have a slightly higher body fat percentage, and you can still be healthy if you are participating in health behaviors. And so we need to move away from an aesthetic and focus more on, are we engaging in the right behaviors that support our heart health, that support our bone health, that support our mood, that support like longevity in our lives. So what I will say is, it's very easy to get caught up in this noise because it's being sold everywhere. But just hold on to that word. It is being sold everywhere. And, I've put the question here, does it ever work? I've been a dietitian for over 25 years now. And I have seen so many obesity interventions, and the majority of obesity interventions have all been based on this move more, eat less, or calories in versus calories out. And while it might work temporarily, it's not sustainable. And there's a reason why it's not sustainable. Cath, if you can move on to the next slide, please. So this is like a bit of a visual representation, and I appreciate not everyone's doing exercise, but I just want to get you to sort of understand the general landscape. If you look at the middle column, this is kind of where we want to be healthy. This means we have enough energy in our body for all those life processes. And when I talk about life processes, I'm talking about our brain, our heart, our lungs, our circulatory system, keeping us warm, our hormones, like all the things we talked about. That's what being human is. And we need a lot of energy just to be human. We even use 10 to 20% of the energy we consume through food to actually digest it. So it's really important that we understand that we need quite a lot of energy to just be human, just to be alive. And then on top of that, we need energy for movement. Now, we've put training load here because I tend to work with athletes quite a lot, but basically we're talking about any movement. I'm not just talking about, you having to go for a run or going to be in the gym. This could be if you are walking the dog, or you're just walking up and down the stairs because you work in an office where there's a lot of stairs. It's all movement. So we need energy on top of our normal energy to stay alive for all sorts of movement. And the more movement you do, the more energy you're going to need. Now, what can happen is if you end up increasing your movement, let's say, for example, you decide to take up a new exercise class, or you decide you're going to walk to work every day, then if it's a big increase, like it's going to create too big a deficit, what will happen is over time, the body will realize that there's not enough energy to support this. And so what happens is it starts to reduce the energy that's available for biological function. And so it actually stops you from losing weight, and it stops you from actually being able to do some of those biological processes that we need. In a similar way, you might keep your movement the same, but actually you decide to be very restrictive with your eating. And again, if you are too restrictive, and this is the problem, this is the kind of key word, is too restrictive, then the same issue can happen. So this is a situation that does happen, and we've seen it happen in all these obesity interventions, is that while there's initial weight loss, it's not sustained. And actually, the only thing that sustains it is changing behavior. And exercise is not something we engage in necessarily to lose weight. What exercise does is actually help us to be more metabolically active. And that's why the choice of exercise we do, particularly as we get older, is going to be so important. Next slide, please, Cath. So one of the things I'm always fighting in the work that I do is this illusion of health. So I think with social media, what has happened is health's become this picture. It's become an image. It's become a certain type of colourful picture of food. It's become a type of training. And actually, health is so much more than that. Our health, yes, we do need to be mindful of the food choices that we make. And yes, we do need to move on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean we need to be extreme. And actually, a big part of health is human connection. A big part of health is feeling a sense of belonging and is not being isolated. And so actually being able to sit around a table and break the bread with your family or your friends creates a really good sense of well-being. And that's also a big part of health. The perimenopause is a tricky time as it is. So you really don't want to be too hard on yourself. You need to kind of be a bit gentle, as I said. And so one of my missions is to start moving society away from this illusion of health, because it's just not appropriate. And there was a really good study that came out earlier this year that demonstrated, like I've already said, that actually the risk of mortality is decreased even if you are in a bigger body with a higher body fat percentage, as long as you allow some movement. So as long as you include some exercise, and that's not saying you have to go and be extreme, it's just like as long as you include some, you can actually still benefit. And that's actually even more, like the risk of mortality is lower in those individuals compared to individuals with a lower body fat percentage who are sedentary. So it just shows you that exercise is really important, not necessarily for weight loss, but actually it's really important for our overall health and well-being. And that's why, again, we need to be mindful about what we choose. Next slide, please, Cath. So obviously there's a lot of noise in this area, particularly around what we should do. These are just some of the ones that Cath hears in her clinic on a regular basis. And I also get, like, I had one of my patients email me yesterday in a complete panic saying, everyone's telling me to take creatine. Do I need to take creatine? And the answer was no, you don't. But this is the issue. There's so much information out there, and it's hard to know. And when you're feeling awful, if you are somebody who is, unfortunate enough to have quite severe symptoms and you're just feeling terrible, of course you're going to want to find a solution to feel better. That's just human nature. And I understand why you will think, right, okay, I will try taking magnesium. I will try this cold water swim because maybe that will help me. And it might help you. But I think it's just important to remember that there is no quick fix to this. To feel better, it's a collection of different behaviors that help us to look after ourselves. Next slide, please. So something I am really passionate about is avoidance of fads and trends and being really, really switched on about celebrity endorsements. There are a lot of individuals in this age group. These three women are just examples. I'm not saying it's all of them, but there's a lot of individuals in this age group who are pushing exercise plans, pushing supplements, pushing, like intermittent fasting. Like there's all sorts of things going on. And again, I go back to remember that if someone is pushing something on you, if someone is trying to sell you something, they're basically profiting from your vulnerability. And so it's really important that you have your head screwed on for this and don't get sucked in. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working at the running show a couple of years ago, and there was a celebrity there who has her own collagen supplement, and she was like pushing the collagen supplement, particularly we were on a panel together around perimenopause. And there are some benefits to collagen depending on your background and your requirements, but not everybody needs to take it. Anyway, we ended up having a chat kind of off stage, and she's like, "Oh, I'd really love to kind of get you involved, and I wondered if you'd be interested in maybe supporting me and kind of providing endorsement for my product." And I said, "Well, send me an email and we can have a conversation." So this is like I said, quite a high profile celebrity. She then sent me, in fact, she didn't, her assistant sent me all the information, and they didn't want me to promote the collagen product. They wanted me to promote a menopause product that had not been tested, had no clinical studies attached to it, but they had decided that it was going to be their next big pitch. And when I went back to them and said, "Well, where are the clinical studies?" And they said, "Oh, we haven't done any." I was like, "Well, I'm not putting my name to anything without any clinical studies." I said, "I can help you get clinical studies, but I would not be interested." And they said, "Well, we've already spent 2 years trying to formulate this, so we haven't got time now." And so I was like, "Okay, well, thanks, but no thanks." But I just wanted to give you that story because I think it's really important that you understand that a lot of people are trying to make money out of you. And I have a real issue with that. It is something that is a real kind of bone of contention with me. Next slide, please. So one of the things I am going to talk to you about is ultra processed food, because I think there is so much misinformation about ultra processed food. So just for context, what is an ultra processed food? Basically, an ultra processed food is a food product where one or more ingredients on the list of ingredients cannot be produced in a domestic kitchen. That's what an ultra processed food is. Okay, so that doesn't mean that every single food that is in that group is problematic. And in fact, a very most recent study by Kevin Hall, and he's a very good scientist. If any of you are into science and really like reading up on things, he's done a lot of metabolic studies, and he has just proven with a massive study, a big population study, that actually eating some ultra processed foods that are nutrient dense. So I give you an example here of baked beans on toast. So, the good old baked bean, nice and cheap, full of nutrients, iron, even the tomato sauce has lycopene in it, which is a really good antioxidant, fiber. And if you just buy the supermarket own, but you buy wholemeal or you buy whole grain or you buy seeded bread, actually the fiber content in these foods make them actually really good for you, and they actually make them really healthy for you, and outweigh any of the potential negatives of the so-called ingredient that might be problematic. So there are definitely certain foods that contain a lot of, as we call, highly processed ingredients that have no nutrient value and should be eaten in moderation, or at least kind of in small amounts. And again, we're not saying you should never eat them, just in small amounts. But please, please, please don't start panicking about food that you can buy on the supermarket shelf that can actually be really, really nutritious for you. So what Kevin Hall did was he did this kind of comparison of like for like. He used a population group where he gave them all whole food, and he then created the same in terms of nutrient value with ultra processed food. So same fiber content, same energy content, same protein, etc. So it was all matched like for like. And there was absolutely no difference in their health outcomes at all. So, and both groups that needed to lost weight on them. So, what the conclusion he's come to is that actually ultra processed foods are not the problem per se. Certain ultra processed foods, so things that we should probably eat less of, are things we always have known we should eat less of. So things like, biscuits, things like chocolate bars, things like fizzy drinks, potentially some of the like super noodly type options. These things, yes, are not great for us. And again, we're not saying you should never eat them, but obviously if you have a diet very high in them, then you're more likely to end up probably not having the body composition that you want, and also probably not feeling that great either. So I just wanted to really make that point that you can get really good nutrition from very accessible foods and also budget friendly foods. Because I have a real bee in my bonnet about feeling like we have to spend our entire wage on food, and that doesn't have to be the case. Next slide, please. So when it comes to kind of the sort of nutritional considerations for this population group, so the perimenopause and the menopause, there is just, I mean, obviously it's about having a varied and balanced diet, as we've discussed. But there are some nutrients that are particularly important. We've already spoken about the importance of iron, but also protein. Protein is really, really key. So red meat, while again, it often gets a bad press, and I definitely think we should be avoiding processed red meat. So we're not talking about pepperami, and we're not talking about chorizo, and we're not talking about ham and bacon, but we are talking about lean cuts of red meat, whether that's a lean cut of steak or some lean mince, or a lean portion of pork. These can actually give you a really good source of iron, but they also give you a really good source of protein. And we do need to increase our intake of protein slightly during this period of time. I'm not saying we need to do like we have to eat like triple or quadruple amounts that we eat already, but just a little bit more. So just being mindful that at every mealtime you're having a decent portion of protein. And obviously protein foods go beyond meat. Obviously you can have things like fish, and you can have beans and pulses and tofu and eggs and dairy foods. So it's just kind of making sure that you are getting enough protein. The other area that's really important is obviously our gut biome. And our gut biome, as I said, does change during this phase. And in particular, we don't know the exact mechanism, but we just know that as the hormones change, it starts to have a negative impact on gut motility, but also the production of the healthy bacteria that we need for good gut biome. And for those of you who are like, well, what's a gut biome? The gut biome is basically our gut flora. So it's the bacteria and fatty acids that are produced in our gut that actually help us to maintain a healthy immune system, and also have had really big links with our mental health. So if this changes, and it can change, like for example, if you get a GI infection, and you basically end up stripping your gut biome because you have production of, you have a virus and you have bacteria in your gut. Similarly, if you take antibiotics, it can affect it. So it's not just about the hormonal influence, but I think it's important to remember that there are things we can do. And to eat for your gut biome, we basically talk about eating whole grains, lots of fiber-rich foods, so fruits and vegetables, beans, pulses. Fermented foods are also very good. So this is where the kind of obsession with kefir has come through, but also things like kimchi. Or pickles. Pickles are also really good. So it's like just trying to make sure that you are adding these things into your diet. Now, that's not saying you've got to do it all in one go. The beauty of changing our lifestyle and changing our dietary approach is that we can do it in our own pace, and we're still going to see the benefits. So the gut bone is definitely something that I would encourage you to think about. Obviously, we've talked, you've had a session with Angela on bone health, and it is a time where we have to be careful and we do need to think about our bone health. And while estrogen and exercise are kind of the key components, also making sure you're having enough dairy or soya, depending on what you prefer, so you're getting enough calcium in your diet, can also make sure, can really help with that process. And the final one is carbohydrate. Now, carbohydrate is still a food that is massively demonized and is still a food a lot of us avoid. And yet, when you sit down and look at this kind of properly, carbohydrates don't have a massive energy yield. And they're often, they're actually needed by the body for optimal hormonal health, optimal bone health, for our brains to work properly. So they are not foods that should be demonized. Just to give you some context, just sat here listening to me, you will be using around 0.3 grams of glucose per minute, just sat there. If you then get up and start doing some movement, let's say you just decide to go for a walk, that will go up to like 1 gram per glucose. 1 gram of glucose per minute. And if you are somebody who likes running or like cycling or swimming, that can go up to like nearly 2.5 grams of glucose per minute. And it gets higher the more trained you are. So if you're somebody who trains a lot and you're highly trained, actually in certain scenarios, you could be using up to 5 grams of glucose per minute. So this just tells you how important carbohydrate is for all of us. And yes, it needs to be adjusted depending on our lifestyle, but generally speaking, nobody should be avoiding it. But what we do need to be mindful of is making the right choices. So you don't need to avoid bread, you don't need to avoid pasta, you don't need to avoid rice. These are really important, but try using whole grain varieties and always try and make sure that, if you are somebody that is a little bit worried about your weight, then change the proportions of your plate. So maybe your plate at the moment, when you look at it, you're having half a plate of carbs and a quarter of a plate of protein and a quarter of a plate of vegetables. We'll change that. Maybe try and do so you have a third of a plate of all three, or you have a quarter of a plate of protein, a quarter of a plate of carbohydrate, and half a plate of vegetables. It will very much depend on you as an individual and what your requirements are. But it's just trying to give you some context. We don't need to avoid carbohydrate. Next slide, please. And this just kind of helps you to see this kind of pictorially. Kind of, it's not, like I said, this is not a one size fits all, but it's a good place to start. And then you can build up depending on how active you are and what your requirements are. But it just kind of helps you to bring things into view, which makes it a bit easier. Next slide, please. And again, I always like to give as much practical information as possible. And so I just thought I'd put this slide up. Again, you can come back to this. Like I said, the recording's going to go out, so you can always come back to this and freeze frame it. But it's just to kind of explain that these are the sorts of foods that can be really helpful to have in your store cupboard, because they're so nutrient dense. And like I've put frozen fruit and vegetables here. You don't have to always have fresh fruit and vegetables. In fact, frozen fruit and vegetables have probably got a higher nutritional value than fresh, because they are picked and frozen, and then their nutrient value is preserved until you use them. So actually, I always use quite a lot of frozen fruit and veg. And then the other one I want to just bring your attention to here is I've put here soup, and you're probably thinking, why soup? Well, what I like about kind of just having a plain tin of soup is that you can actually bulk it out and you can make it into a really nutritious meal. If you are running short of time or actually just don't have much else. So if you've got some tinned beans and pulses in the cupboard, you've got some frozen veg, actually, if you just fry that up in a little bit of oil and add that to your soup, you actually end up with a nice chunky soup that is really tasty and just gives you a little bit more nourishment. So that's just some options for you. Next slide, please. So this thinking, I mean, I think you've probably seen this picture. As we know, our bone health starts to decline, and it declines in both men and women, but obviously particularly in women as they start going through perimenopause and menopause, it drops significantly. And I'm sure Angela spoke about the different things you can do, and I'm not going to kind of repeat what she said, but there's a few things that we do need to be mindful of. Obviously, Cath has also previously probably spoken about the benefits of, if you do decide to take HRT, then this is one of the key benefits of HRT, is that the estrogen does help to continue to protect your bone health for a little bit longer. So if we move on to the next slide. So what we do know is that during perimenopause and menopause, it is really, really beneficial to stay active or to even start being active. And what an active lifestyle does is improve our mood. It does help sort of reduce or curtail emerging weight gain that might happen. And I think I want to point out here, not everybody will gain weight. It is, some of this is genetic, again, some of it is lifestyle related, but it's just important to appreciate that our bodies will change as our hormones change. But again, doing exercise and being active can help with that. Exercise really helps with our body composition. That's probably the number one thing it does, is help to build more lean muscle mass, which actually is what then keeps the weight off, because the more muscle mass you have, the more metabolically active you are. And it's the biggest difference really between people who generally stay, I guess slim is a word that we tend to use, or stay fit and healthy into their as they age, and those that start becoming more and more sedentary. And the difference really is that if we are just sedentary, we do start to lose muscle mass every decade once we hit 40. And so every time you lose muscle mass, you also drop your metabolic rate, because that's what needs energy. Whereas if you can do exercise, it can actually help to maintain that. And that then means that you can continue to eat actually as you probably have previously eaten, because you need more energy to keep those muscles healthy and moving. Bone health, as we talked about, and also it does help to reduce the risk of heart disease. And again, I'm sure Cath has explained previously that as estrogen declines, as women, our risk of heart disease tends to increase, because estrogen's actually got a protective factor. So again, if you're active, that can help with a reduction in the risk of heart disease. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what I really like. This is what I was saying about earlier, is that rather than fixating on being healthy and following a trend or following a fad, or kind of getting caught up in all the noise, particularly on social media, we often talk about health behaviors. And here are just a kind of few health behaviors you can think about. So if we can have the next slide. So these are some nutrition health behaviors. So as I said already previously, try and have whole grain where possible. That's really, really, really important. Like I said, it helps the gut microbiome. The fibers also just helps to fill you up, and it's got more nutrients. Now, that doesn't, like, if you're finding that a difficult step because you just don't like it, then you can always say, so for example, with rice, you could do half and half to start with, or even less than that, and then slowly build that up. Try and add a handful of nuts a day, and that could be any nuts you like. It could be Brazil nuts, that could be almonds, it can be cashew nuts, whatever you like. And you might think, well, nuts are really high in fat, so why would I do that? Nuts are high in fat, but they're also really high in fiber. And again, it goes back to the reason why calories in versus calories out don't work. A lot of food is mislabeled. So nuts obviously do have quite a high energy value when you look on the back of a packet, but you don't absorb a lot of that because of the high fiber content. So actually, you probably only absorb about 60% of the energy that is suggested on the back of a label when it comes to nuts. The other good thing about nuts is that they're high in essential fatty acids, which not only help us to feel fuller, but they're also really important for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins. Try and use olive oil again for the essential fatty acids. A good kind of tip if you are somebody who is trying to maybe does want to lose a little bit of weight, does want to kind of drop a few pounds, is actually try and have a bowl of salad or a plate of vegetables ahead of your lunch and your dinner. So have that first and then have your protein or have your dinner, whatever it is, even if it's like a lasagna, that's not a problem. Always have regular meals. Like again, a lot of people have got into the whole intermittent fasting and actually it's really not that great for anyone. And there was again a study that came out earlier this year that showed that people who engage in intermittent fasting actually had a higher risk of cardiovascular disease than those that didn't. So actually having regular meals is more important. Encourage some daily movement. Now, this is very independent. This is kind of very dependent on where you are. If you're somebody who at the moment does very little, then you just start with what's going to work for you. So it might just be simply that you start doing some lunges or some squats while you're brushing your teeth. And that might be all you do for the first month. And that's okay. And it's then slowly building it up. And if you are somebody who is already engaged in exercise, then it's maybe about thinking, and you're feeling quite tired, especially if you do a lot of cardio. So I do a lot of running, but what I've found is that as I've gone through this period of perimenopause, I've had to reduce my running, but I've increased my strength work. And that's been really, really helpful in the sense of helping my bone health, helping my running actually, and also maintaining good body composition. So some daily movement can just be walking the dog, that's fine, is really important. But what I will say is also try and do some body weight type exercise. And then the final one is encouraging mindfulness. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking necessarily about sitting and doing meditation for an hour a day or anything like that. But actually being mindful is actually being present in this moment. So every now and again, even if it's just like twice a day, just stop for a few minutes and be conscious of your surrounding, be aware of what's going on for you. What can you hear? What can you see? What can you smell? What's going on for you as an individual? How are you feeling? What do you need? This can be really helpful to just start to re-engage and connect back with yourself and just help ground you a little bit. Next slide, please. So just to kind of finish, I guess what we wanted to kind of get across is that we do need to change the narrative that weight loss is the miracle cure for everything, because it's not. Actually, as we've talked about, health behaviors are much more important and they're going to make you feel better. Going on a restrictive diet might help you lose 2 or 3 kilos, which you believe is going to make you feel better because you'll be more confident. But actually, it might not physically make you feel better. It might not psychologically make you feel better. Whereas engaging in good health behaviors is going to be much more supportive. An individual's aesthetic or look is the least interesting thing about them. I always say that to everybody I come across, is like, it really is the least interesting thing about you. So you don't need to fixate on that. Remember to appreciate that, appreciate the information that's out there and think about what's relevant to you. Again, really important. There's so much information and not everything is going to be relevant to you in your present place. Thoughts are real, but that doesn't mean that they are fact. So again, if you kind of find yourself getting bombarded with negative thinking, remember that thoughts are real. They're trying to tell you something, but perhaps they're not factual. Perhaps we need to think about thinking errors a little bit, like, have I mind read there? Have I been fortune telling there? And actually, what do I actually know right now? Food is central to our well-being and our performance. A hungry body just won't work. It's really important to nourish, nurture, and respect your body, particularly at this time of life, but all the way through, but particularly now. Learn to listen and respond to your body, not just kind of trying to control it all the time. I think we're always trying to squeeze the body and make it do what we want it to do, when actually, if you listen to it, it tells you what it needs. And just be mindful of social media and remember those who profit from the vulnerable. Last slide, please, Cath. And that's it from us.
Well, a massive thank you to Renee and Cath for a fascinating session there. It was very useful. I learned a lot. Thank you very much for being here. If you do have any questions about what you've seen or heard today, you can submit them via the library service where you found this webinar today. We will pass them on to be collated, and we will try to answer as many as possible when we release the webinar recordings. And once again, a massive thank you to everyone for joining us on this session, and hopefully the earlier sessions as well. I think they've really shown how library services across the Northwest can collaborate to bring you expert voices and insights. And once again, thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.